weathered carbonate, the same as karst. So those are like the infant stages of karst development, if you will. That's a sign of when it was at the surface. Wind, rain, ice, freeze, thaw has broken this up, and that can, over time, allow the development of more extensive karst features. You even look over in Door County, Kewaunee County, at their photos, at their work in karst features, and they get some pretty dramatic. I don't see any of those faults or fractures being big enough to lower someone down. You look in the southwest part of the state where you know, it's been working for a long time, you got caves, you got tunnels. In that case, yes, you could. I just don't see it as happening here.
Mr. Nagy?
I'm Steve Nagy, residing on Julius Drive and Spencer Road. 48 years, enjoying 48 years in Greenville. I appreciate very much the scientific lecture education that we're getting. I find it to be informative, and I have no doubt personally that it's accurate and is a reasonable effort to answer the questions of, is there a karst feature in evidence, and does the lack of or existence of that feature impact in any way the quality of groundwater in wells? I think that that's reasonable and well answered. A question to the town board, and I know we're not asking the town board now, but I would like to know why we're spending thousands of dollars answering this question. I had the good fortune of reading a very nicely written article by Gannett Post-Crescent to Mr. Benke over the weekend, and one of the hot links I found on the web version of it was the Justice Department referral of 3 parties, including Town of Greenville, Immel, and Mr. Woods, for prosecution to the Justice Department. And there was no mention of a karst feature. There were mentions of straightening a stream, of modifying a stream bed, eliminating or modifying wetlands. A lot of it was technical terminology I didn't really understand, but nothing was mentioned about a karst feature. Now, I know that some folks who have been here for generations may have kind of a soft spot in their heart for a karst feature. But, you know, I've got a little piece of property in Fremont, and I would call it a couple of negative karst features where water bubbles out of the ground. You know, water goes in, water comes out. It's a normal process. So I think there are bigger questions to ask and to be answered. I tried to address that in my letter to the town board a few days ago, and hopefully we'll have additional conversation about that.
Thanks for the comments, Steve.
Yeah, thanks for the comments.
Go ahead, ma'am.
Christina Mischler, N858 Julius Drive. My question is, you referred a lot to deeper wells and the proper casing and so on. What about possible contamination for shallow wells? Because our well is very shallow. It is nowhere near even 50 feet. On a good day, I think it's 30-ish. So do you think there's possible contamination problems that way, or do you think no?
What's your well screened in? Is that in sandy deposits, or does that go down into the limestone rock?
Into limestone.
It does. Because that is pretty shallow. It's an older well, I would presume. So obviously, upper part of the aquifer, the shallower the well is, the more recent the water would have occurred. And so yes, it might very well be more susceptible to contamination. It's getting its water from somewhere close by. That would be a case where if there was preferential recharge into the subsurface that was in your well recharge area, you could very well see effects.
But it will depend on how far your well is from this actual drainage structure to determine whether you are really at risk or not. So that's a very important aspect of this.
Yeah, you might want to do some water quality testing to kind of get a handle on your overall water quality. Do you test your well? could. Because, we can discuss theories on how things could happen, how water flow could happen, but there's nothing like empirical evidence, and that's why if you got the chemistry data, and you can look at it and it says, well, this chemistry data is consistent with this geology, or it's consistent with that formations, or it has substances that you wouldn't expect normally, that can give you some information really on the path that water took to your well. But yeah, shallow wells are certainly more susceptible.
Was yours one of the wells that was tested as part of this? Okay. What did you say your address was?
858 Julius.
Julius 858. So you are between Julius and School Road? Or sorry, 96 and School Road?
No, we're just
South of that? Okay. All right. Just trying to get an idea of where you are. So they're, was that about a half mile from this property? Straight line?
To the southwest?
Southwest, yeah. Okay. All right, any other questions for Pete? Mr. Richter?
Richter in 1077 Pebble Ridge Road. So if we don't have a karst, what do we have? Just a big natural drain? Obviously, why did we dig into it? I mean, what was the reason for that?
Well, I did recall an article, a newspaper article that says a karst was destroyed. And, that kind of catches my attention because that means you're digging down into a rock and doing some work into it. I didn't find anything, so clearly karst wasn't destroyed. It may have been thwarted by eliminating the preferential path on down, but I really think that there are other reasons why at some time, particularly prior to the reconstruction of the stream and during times of flood, that these areas of swirl pools and preferential water infiltration occurred. But I think that there are other reasons. It's certainly not that there's a karst feature. It's not like there's a rock volcano that climbs up there and serves as the karst feature. So it would have to be down 5-10 feet below that surface, and something would have to convey it down to that feature.
All right, now I didn't ask anything about a karst. Why did we dig it so deep there? Is that a natural drain? That area where that digging is, that they so-called karst is that a natural water drain?
Well, this isn't, this is certainly a historic drainage way, and probably
Underground drain?
only to the extent, in my interpretation, where it passes the clay unit, where it sits on time and doesn't penetrate, and gets into this area of sandy unit. And when the flow decreases, it really fills up this maybe 2 to 3 feet of silty, sandy material that's in with the fractured bedrock. And that's the formation that it continues to flow with, bottomed out by that competent rock. And so because it can't go farther down into that rock because the weathering hasn't carved out that valley, it moves laterally in that weathered and superficial sandy deposits on out. So there isn't a deep hole here that I've identified.
Where's all that water going? Think of a drain, that's coming from the other side of 76, that subdivision, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is that where the overflow, what do you call that?
The east side of 76,
Retention pond?
there's a retention pond there, yep.
Retention pond where it overflows, it's gonna come down that ditch and go down there, is that right?
Right, right.
Where is that all gonna go?
Well, and during the springtime, when the recharge first occurs, you might have frost in the ground, you might have soils that are pretty wet. All that goes as surface water and discharges out. That's why the meandering stream, that was running surface water, and that happens primarily in the spring runoff time. As the year goes on, your runoff decreases. This was still infiltrating into the sand and gravel, but it couldn't hold enough. It couldn't infiltrate fast enough, and that's why there was surface water. By the time, and this is still flowing this way, when the surface water backs off, gets to be pretty low flow rate, this drains, then this water that formerly was flowing in this sand-lined channel essentially sinks down. And so it is the decrease in flow rate during the seasons that cause the disappearing stream. Not that there's a big hole there that's channeling it away. In fact, if there was a big hole that would channel it away, you wouldn't expect it to be a reappearing, disappearing stream. A disappearing stream typically refers to a karst formation attached to connected to some preferential flow. And so the stream is flowing along the surface, dives down, goes underground, oftentimes pops back up and starts flowing again. We don't see that here. We see transitional. In the spring, you got surface water runoff. In the summer, you got surface water up here, and this disappears here. So it's a disappearing, reappearing stream, a different animal than you'd expect from a karst-featured disappearing stream.
What's running water into that really doesn't make any sense. It's not really a healthy thing to do, is it?
To run water into where?
That big hole they dug with supposedly called karst.
I don't think nobody.
That's where that ditch goes into, right?
No,
No.
they didn't dig a hole that they call the karst. This was an existing drainage way. The storage pond was upstream of this. This area is a fairly natural area. And again, it's probably been draining certainly for 10,000 years. And so they're just pumping more water into it. No, I don't think, there's no thought of somebody dug down this. It's a matter, is that a naturally occurring condition?
Still a story came out, it was dug down 10 feet they went into it, and that was on the paper news, right?
Yeah, and that's what I don't have a good answer to.
So you don't know what this looked like before that digging took place then, right?
Which,
Oh, all right. So, you know what digging he's talking about? The sanitary sewer?
Just the ditch, the stream ditch.
Oh, I'm sorry. A lot of this discussion regarding karst predates that by a fair bit. And so that's what I was looking at. I'm generally ignoring the subsequent ditch deepening, stream altering.
I just thought some of this had something to do with maybe some well contamination, but I'm probably way off base. That's okay, thank you, sir.
I don't
any
see
other
it.
questions? Hold on, before you do, I got a first timer, so go ahead in the red.
Jerry Bex, N1670. Maybe this isn't your area here, but I'm going to ask it. I think on my end of it, some of the concern is that there was a lot of some wetland down there that was damaged from the ditch running into this wetland, then going through the wetland and getting into this so-called full karst in the ground. Am I accurate by saying that they kind of took God's filter out of the way before the water ran into this hole?
I'll leave Nick to answer that one.
So there is a
but-
second presentation on the restoration plan.
I didn't know if I should ask that now or not.
So I think you should get your information from McMahon Associates, and if not, make sure you ask again. Scofford?
I just wanted to mention, I called David Hart from UW Extension in the southern part of the state, who is very qualified to know about karst, and I asked him how I would find out if this was a karst, or how he would suggest going about it. And later in our discussion, he said that those in his professional circle, including some of those you mentioned, said something's mentioned something UW Stevens Point, from UW Oshkosh, and around, said we have talked about this, and there is no doubt it is a karst. He said don't let anybody tell you otherwise.
Any other questions for Sand Creek before we move on to our stream restoration plan? Not seeing any, so I want to thank you again, Pete,
All right.
for everything that you've informed us of, and appreciate your time and
Yes.
Sandy
thanks for
Creek's
your
efforts.
time and energies.
So we do have a second presentation on our restoration plan for the stream, so that should cover some more details that you have questions about. So turning the microphone over to Nick. So Joel, do you mind just giving a little information on where we're sitting at with our plan before Nick starts, or you want Nick to do that?
That's fine. I'm good.
Okay. All right. All right, Nick, the floor is yours. If we could just have a little order so that everybody can hear what Nick has to say, and then when Nick's done, we'll have some time for some questions. Once all this is complete, we do have a board meeting that we need to get through tonight as well. So, Nick, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. So I'm here to talk more about the surface water part of it and some of the stream wetland type issues that exist on this. So Pete kind of covered the underground component. So again, we have the disappearing stream that I think Peter covered pretty well. And then we have Navigable Stream, which is a DNR concern, as well as the wetlands, which is a DNR concern. The DNR was concerned about the disappearing stream more from the well side of things, private wells, things like that, not having a lot of information on it at that time. So to get us started, I just wanted to kind of identify how things have changed out here. So I go back to 2015 is what I call before the stream was modified. And what you're looking at on this drawing would be this green line is the sanitary sewer that was recently installed on the south side of the stream. The blue line is essentially the stream. So you can see under Municipal Drive, just on this edge of the page, there's some culverts under the highway built up real high, and then that discharges into the blue line, which is a stream. And then in here, this green area is the wooded area where the stream kind of meanders through, and then it exits the Lynn property and then heads west along the lot line. And then the sanitary sewer, like I said, is the green with the black dots on it. This lighter green hatch is essentially the mapped wetland. So this was delineated essentially partially as part of the sanitary sewer project, and then the north side and other areas were investigated a little bit closer this past spring, just because the focus of the original wetland delineation was for the sanitary sewer and not necessarily the north side of the stream. And then we have a couple of dots on here, one here, and then one over in the corner. And those were the disappearing streams as provided by Outagamie County. They must have shot those locations years ago, so they just were kind enough to share those shots. So those would be identified as provided by Outagamie County. This location is the one that we keep talking about with that rock, dumped in. I didn't hear that on the other two locations, but nonetheless, the county must have observed some water disappearing in those locations as well. So this is the alignment configuration of the stream corridor back in 2015. And then let me just back up. I have 4 photographs here, and I'm going to start kind of in this wooded area, and then we're going to head to the west as we move through that system. So in the wooded area, this is basically how that stream looked in 2015. And honestly, this particular picture would probably apply to today as well, because this was a segment that was not necessarily touched. And then as we head west, we're kind of in between a break in the woods. I'll show you where that photograph is. There's a gap in the woods where this grassy area. That's where this photograph was taken, kind of looking out into the farm field in that direction. So you can see the farm field in the background. Right here, it's kind of all a big flat grassy area, and then for whatever reason the stream dropped down a good foot here, and you can see there's a pretty defined channel, and then by the time it left the grass area, and then it kind of entered out into the farm field there. So this was early in the year. You can see there's no leaves on the tree, so this is probably spring runoff during this period. And then as it continues downstream, you can see it kind of went through the farm field. And then this was the western edge of it. You can the homes are off of Churchill. I think your house is just right there. Yep. So this is
little bit of the edge of the wooded area, and we're heading towards that power line that runs back there, kind of on the lot corner. There's a fire hydrant over there as well. But you can see the low or the stream channel essentially kind of pass through the farm field there. You can see the corn rows. So that's basically, I don't have any photographs of the upper area up by Highway 76, but that definitely had a little bit better defined channel in through here. It was a very poorly defined channel is the way I would say it. And some of that's probably attributed to that disappearing stream water. It just didn't form that channel necessarily down in this area. Then we come to the current condition, and then on the current condition, you can still see the original stream alignment, which is the blue line that kind of went out into the farm field and so forth. With the stream dredging that happened, this pink line is how the stream was realigned. So it was basically followed the old stream alignment, and then it hugged the edge of the woods, and then basically followed the old stream alignment out to Highway 76. As part of that activity, the soil that was removed from dredging the stream was placed generally on the north side of the waterway, and as part of that, some of these green wetlands were filled in. So that black hatch identifies some areas where the wetlands were filled, and as part of the restoration plan, that material will be removed. We also have a couple of drain tile pipes, which are shown in white here. Those drain tile pipes discharge into the waterway, and some of them look like they were recently installed, and some maybe were broken and they just tried to fix them. So these are some photographs starting at Highway 76, looking west. This is an old field crossing right next to the trail, kind of at the bottom of the hill, and then you can kind of see the stream channel. It's probably 2 feet deeper than what it was back in 2015, maybe 3 up in this area. And then the material was placed kind of in this swath through here. This is on that bend where one of the disappearing streams with the rock was. This is kind of how that stream kind of comes around that corner. And then this is heading west towards the residences on Churchill. That gap in the woods is basically in here where that grass area was. And the other photo. And then this is the channel as it heads towards that lot corner. Again, you can see the power lines in the back. There's a little fire hydrant here. Off to the left is that wooded area where the stream kind of hugs that edge of the woods. So that's kind of how it looks today. Obviously, things are growing out there more so than in these photos just because they're from the spring. And then for the restoration activities that are proposed out here, originally we had some initial meetings with the DNR about perhaps trying to protect that groundwater a little bit more, not knowing what we were dealing with from the disappearing stream standpoint. And the idea was to kind of grab the water up here and leave it in its current path and then cross over and bring the stream on the south side of the woods and then connect it back in. Therefore, we would have been sort of bypassing those 3 locations for the disappearing stream. But through that process, I think the decision ultimately came back to put it back exactly where it was in the stream's old condition. So that's what this basically depicts, is the same stream alignment that existed back in 2015. And then we have the wetlands again. That wetland area that was filled up here, that material would be removed to basically reestablish that wetland to the former grades that were out there. The wooded areas along here would remain. And then we would raise the stream bed up and basically put it back to the way it was in its old elevation profile and depth. And then as part of that, the DNR and the county had requested a 100-foot vegetated buffer on each side of the waterway. So that yellow area is basically that 100-foot buffer on each side of the stream. So you can see the buffer would encompass almost all of the wetland. It would encompass most of the wooded area and most of the sanitary sewer except for a stretch through there. Also, as part of that, some of the drain tiles would have to be raised back up in height so that it works with the new stream elevation. Part of the reason for raising the stream bed back up is to reestablish that wetland hydrology in this upper area. Originally, DNR was thinking there were some wetlands down here, but after some back and forth between us and the DNR, basically everyone concurred that from this point over, not necessarily any wetlands in there, that it was mainly up in this clayier area. And then once it hit that disappearing stream, the water tends to go underground and you don't see the wetlands pop up to the west of there, which kind of makes sense. So that's basically the path we're on for the proposed condition, is essentially putting it back elevation-wise, location-wise to the same spot, which would reintroduce those flows back into those disappearing streams just like they were in the past. We will add some log veins and woody habitat along the way is what the DNR was asking for on that. And then the buffers will be planted in some perennial vegetation essentially. So as far as permits go, typical permit schedule, when we talk about DNR, Chapter 30 is basically the stream permit, and then there's the wetland permit. This would be an individual permit. Normally that process takes 3 to 12 months based on other projects that we permitted in the past in other communities. And then a notice of intent permit is basically an erosion control permit. And erosion control permits by the state are usually issued about a month after we have the Chapter 30 and wetland permits. And then Army Corps permit for wetlands can run concurrent with the DNR wetland permit, and we see that timeline go anywhere from 1 to 12 months for that permit. And then after we have the DNR permits in hand, then we can submit to the county for their conditional use permit, which generally takes 1 to 2 months depending on the timing of meetings and so forth. So at this point, I think just with the permitting schedule, I think we're anticipating maybe a June construction fix on it as opposed to this year kind of thing. So the DNR does have a blackout period for construction in streams that generally runs from about March through mid-June. So we can't really do work in the streams during that period. So that's sort of the path we're on, essentially. So if there's questions, I can try to field those. I know there was a wetland question. But
Just one moment. Has your plan that we put together for the town, has that been approved by the DNR yet?
it has not. The DNR recently was able to get out there to do the wetland concurrence. As I said, we were kind of going back and forth for a while on that western area. And they were able to get out there, I would say, that last week of August.
Okay.
So we just got confirmation that we're all on the same page as far as the wetlands go. And it's hard to completely go all in on final plans until we have concurrence. Otherwise, we might be wasting money essentially by needing to redesign things. So the idea was to try to...
How long have we been waiting for that concurrence?
I think the initial report that we submitted to the DNR was back in May, probably.
Okay.
And then they asked us to go out and do some more investigations, which we did, just because some of the fill material, we had to dig through the fill material in order to better define or identify what the old limits look like. And that information was submitted probably in June, so then just took some time for the DNR to get out there to do that confirmation, basically. So that is done now, and we're hoping to submit those permits here probably in 3-4 weeks, and then hopefully have, approval conceptually.
Any of that permitting process, can that be done in parallel, or do you have to do one and it's linear and you got to wait for that one to be approved before you can get to the next?
Well, usually you start with the DNR and the Army Corps permits, which would be the first starting point, this one and this one. And again, depending on their workload and other things going on, that can take 3 to 12 months.
Okay.
And then after we have this one, these permits, then we can apply for that one or obtain that one. And then after we have these 2 or 3, we can then apply for this. So it is
Somewhat
sort of
both, right? So
additive.
I asked if you could do it in parallel. Some of them you can,
Some of them you can.
and
And
some of them are
Yep.
linear that you have to wait. There's a
Correct.
sequence that you have to go to.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you. I won't ask all the questions. So, question in the back, red hat. Oh, second, Gary. You'll be next.
I just want, like, where the farm is, where the stream is, in the southwest corner, there's the Outagamie County survey marker. What is that for?
Well, there's survey markers that the county maintains. That might just be one of them. There's this is basically a quarter section or a 40-acre parcel, so that's a marker probably for a section or something like that, a section corner perhaps.
And then where that woods is, I see, when they dug that, they dumped stuff in the woods. Is that going to be restored?
Yep, the intent is to basically put the elevations back to the way it was back in 2015.
And then where your retention pond is there, does the land from the north, the field from the north drain into there too then?
Are you talking on the east side
East
of
side.
Highway 76?
Yes.
I don't know about the area to the north, I guess.
Because, see, there was a field there, I know years after years after years, when the snow would melt, there'd be a tractor back there pumping water out there.
I know which one you're talking about. Yeah.
This year, there's no tractor in there pumping the water out. It drained out by itself after they built that pond.
So, the area that you're talking about is a parcel of land that's still going through planning. So, I couldn't tell you what's happening with that.
Yeah, and maybe it's a drain tile that was fixed or something. I don't know the details necessarily. But the water, like Towering Pines and those ponds that were recently constructed on the east side of Highway 76 or Municipal Drive do flow through this waterway.
Okay, Mr. Bex, Gary.
Gary Bex, N1670 Prairie Drive. So now that, we dug this ditch and we're gonna go through and fix it, and I guess I'm assuming that a lot of that water isn't going to disappear into the ground like it did before, because it was pretty evident that the water disappeared into the ground and nobody could really see where it came out.
Yep.
My concern now is, are we gonna run into more flooding problems to the west in people's existing properties, Island Road, the swamp area down there?
So you're-
Run into the same problem we have over here on Everglades?
The surface water, you're concerned about additional surface water
Well, the
being
water
there.
that's all gonna run down that ditch, cause now it's got a nice stream to run through.
Mhm.
It's not gonna possibly run into those holes that were there and have been altered, and the water disappeared. So now we've got all these more gallons, that you're gonna work their way to the west onto people that didn't have a problem before and now are going to, like we have over here in Everglades. So that's a concern I'm a little wondering about.
So as I mentioned, we're basically putting the stream back in the same exact spot it was in 2015. So the water that would be flowing through the stream just like it did prior to 2015, that's what will be happening in the future. But so if it disappeared there in the past and that's still a functioning disappearing stream, then that's where it would go basically. So basically putting it back to the way it was. Regarding the development on the east side, obviously anytime we add pavement and roofs and so forth, we're adding more runoff volume compared to a woods or a farm field. So there was those stormwater detention ponds that were constructed on the east side of the highway with the purpose of throttling those flows back and basically putting them back to sort of a grassland condition, or what we call pre-development condition. So those flows passing through here should be equal to or less than what has been passing through here in the past, at least from a peak flow standpoint. From a volume standpoint, there'll probably be more volume of water passing through here just because of the more pavement and so forth. So.
Go ahead, right up front here. Jim, you'll be next.
Joe Ryan, W6622 Cobblestone Court. Just wondering if your plan had an estimated cost associated with it?
We have not done an estimated cost on it.
Jim?
Jim Eckering, 2044, that was one of my questions. But the other one was, aside from the DNR and the Corps of Engineers, are there any other
Sure. As I said, we have the DNR, we have the Army Corps, and then we have Outagamie County. It'd probably be planning and zoning would be the department that would be run through, and it would go through one of the county committees essentially. So those would be the three entities, I would say, for permitting.
So right now, it sounds like you've had discussions with the DNR.
Yep.
About this. So how about the other, like the Corps and the county? They're aware of at least the concept of what you're doing?
So we've had face-to-face meeting with the DNR back when we were trying to basically divert the water away from the disappearing stream areas. And that was a big group meeting where drinking water, it was the wetland folks, it was basically anyone at the DNR that had a discipline was probably at that meeting, weighing in and providing comment. And the county was at that meeting. The Corps of Engineers was not at that meeting, but our experience in these cases is they want to see it put back to the way it was, and if we're doing something different, then they'll have to weigh in on it. But at this point, it's they'll want to get a permit or have approval on it, but because we're putting it back to the way it was at this point, there's probably not a lot of comment there on their end.
Mr. Julius, do you have a question?
Yes. There's multitudes of routings of that stream. So if you look at the overheads from 38 to 57, there's scarcely a tree, and the route is great. And so as the years progress, it's only in recent years that you have many trees along that stream, because the stream wasn't being maintained. Nobody wanted to go, and Steinockers also had done that at one time to maintain the stream. But in the last few years, nobody has. So if I'm asking, I don't believe you're going back to the original stream course, because that would involve taking all of the box elders and brush and stuff out to put the stream back the way it was. So then there was where it started to erode the beach, when it couldn't handle the water and keep flow. And then there is where the stream was moved to with the new ditch. Now, am I given to understand right from looking at the town plan briefly that was proposed, that we're going to keep the new routing of the stream, but raise up the bottom of it and make some modifications? Can you help me and maybe some of the rest understand? Because the original stream was much straighter in the line back in 38 and 57, all those years.
Sure. I can't say I've looked at the 1938 photographs, but I know that those photos exist out there. So what alignment the stream took back then, I can't speak to that. What I can say is this is the alignment that it was in 2015 prior to the stream dredging that occurred, and the proposal here is basically to put it back exactly to the way it was, both in elevation and in location.
But then we won't be using the new stream that was dug?
That's correct.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
Go ahead, Mr. Richter.
Yeah, thanks. I also own the property on West 80, 23, I believe it is, 96, which is on Island Road, back by the Rat River. And we're dumping so much water into that Rat River at times that actually the banks are eroding away back there. If you go back and look in there, and that thing flows over in the spring like you wouldn't believe. It floods out that whole land. I flooded pretty much all the way up to 96. Isn't there another way they could run this water out of here? I mean, over on Pebble Ridge over there, I think we're just running straight north and going down into the Everglades down there or something. Why do we take this path?
I think from a DNR regulatory standpoint, we talked about these wetlands here. There's probably wetlands downstream, particularly along the Rat River. And the DNR's goal usually is to try to maintain that hydrology to those wetlands so that they continue to function as they are. So when you pull water away from a wetland, you can starve it or cause it to shrink. For instance, you go back to the Dust Bowl days, and there's probably a lot more property that wasn't a wetland, if you will, just because it was a dry cycle, if you will, in our climate. And obviously it's been a little bit wetter these past few years. Like this year was pretty wet, I think. But yeah, we we have our glaciers 2,000 years ago, and I assume it was really wet then, but point is that this is what we know today, and this is how the DNR makes their decisions about what they will permit and not. Well, just from a surface of the land perspective, this is the path of least resistance. You know, this is where it goes now. This is how the elevation of the land lays and how it's gone historically. So to change that would be quite an effort, I would say, costly one perhaps.
Well, are you asking if we could route that water to the east instead of to the west or to the north?
That would be to the Everglades swamp.
That's what. I think that's a really good question, and I think that our stormwater superintendent would probably be the best person for you to talk to about that. Obviously, Chris Pagels, and Joel, you might have a comment.
We have DNR officials that will dictate to us, as this is an enforcement measure, they're asking us to put it back to 2015 edition.
Which is exactly what I was going to say.
That's a pretty big retention pond there.
Yeah, it based on the criteria in the town's ordinances for stormwater control, it should be no different or slightly better than what it was in 2015, for example. There'll be more runoff volume. But the peak flows and the limits or the extent of the flooding, you know, on people's property would be about the same.
I would actually invite you to call Mr. Pagels and talk to him about that. He'll give you a good education about what the purpose of that retention pond is. We all do. We all want to move forward on this. That's for sure. The DNR requirements are what they are for restoring this stream. So we've got to move forward with those.
We can ask Andrew's dad, and we have this conversation, we go look around, it is real deep in the banks of that water comes out.
Any other questions? Up front first, and then it'll be next.
Mike Hare, N1132. I'm concerned that when you restore it, we're going to be back to the flooding on the 2 and 3 inch rains when we get them. And I'm worried that in the first year that you do it, are you going to be able to hold that loose soil? And how are you going to hold it? And is there any guarantees that you can hold that soil in a 2 or 3 inch rain? Or it's not only going to go on my property, but it's going to go all the way down to the Rat River. So, and this is my final comment, I know this is not a perfect job, and everybody would like to do it over again, but it's done. And why are we going to spend all this money and recreate the wheel when the water's it's in their well now. It's never going to overflow until the 10-inch rain comes, with as deep as it is. Why not just leave it? Why are we going to spend all this money to possibly cause other problems down the road with flooding and erosion from that loose soil?
I think the path we started on was to try to partially leave part of it from here down because there weren't any wetlands down here, but kind of parts of it not knowing what the disappearing streams were. DNR thought there was wetlands down here at that time yet, and like I said, we just got that issue resolved like 2 weeks ago. So, but town had made the decision, we're just putting it back to the way it was maybe a month before that, just to kind of keep the process moving so that we don't continue to string this along.
I just don't want to make a bad
No,
decision.
I understand. Yep.
And I think it's not just me. I'm not, I got a lot into this because of where my property location is, but there's a lot of people downstream from there too. It's
Yep.
not just me.
But I will say this upper area, right, with the wetlands, there's not really a choice there. We have to raise that stream bed back up. Otherwise, those wetlands will basically dry up, and that's not what the DNR wants to see. The other thing I would say is when you channel a stream down like that, you are taking away a little bit of storage. When you think about how wide the water spreads through here, during a bigger event, there's just a little more flood storage, if you will, that would be there. So as opposed to putting it in this narrow channel. So there are some of those benefits, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, everybody wishes they had dug it a little less deep. We may be in a different position right now, but that's my thought.
And just to clarify, obviously this is an enforcement measure that's being levied upon us from the DNR and the county. And their requirement is to put it back into that pre-2015 condition. So we don't really have a lot of subjection to determining the process or the end result of that. And then the other component of that, and Nick, I don't know if you mentioned it completely, but they are requiring a flood study to be done and performed as part of this to determine what the impacts of putting it back to that 2015 condition will provide.
Yeah, I think just to add on a little bit, Joel, to what you're saying, I think like DNR would be open to keeping this segment straight there rather than having it go out into the farm field. They've kind of expressed that in phone calls. Now that there's no wetlands kind of down there. But what we were trying to do was avoid the floodplain study because we were just going to put it back to the way it was, so the need for that would have went away, or the expense of that would have went away. But as soon as we start making any changes that deviate from that 2015 condition, it triggers more expense, if you will. So the idea was just put it back to the way it was, avoid the floodplain study, and then let whoever develops it worry about that floodplain study cost. But just with this being enforcement, we need to do the floodplain study at this point, but the plan is still to put it back to the way it was because that's kind of the decision that was made a month and a half ago or so.
There's a question back here. I'll get you.
Paul Forrest on N183 Sunset Drive. I wanted to know the original reason for changing the stream. Whose benefit was it for, or what was the reason to alter this? And is this something that the town did, that the town approved? And if not, who's going to pay to put it back the way it was?
Joel, go ahead.
Obviously, and maybe we're in tune with some of the dialogue and discussion. For those of you that don't know me, I guess let me introduce myself. My name is Joel Grzeski. I was appointed the town administrator for Greenville and began my tenure in July. This obviously was done before I began, so I can't really speak to the specific day-to-day decision-making that happened there. But what I can say is that we are investigating as to who was the responsible individuals completely and wholly as it relates to the digging of this ditch. We know that there had been some town involvement from a maintenance and operations standpoint. We know that there were members of the town board that rent land there that had some involvement in that dredging as well. From the town's perspective, there was an interest from our sanitary district to be involved in the initial project because of that sanitary sewer interceptor that runs through that property. Through that project, there was some sedimentation that occurred in that stream, and so the intent was to try to remove some of that sedimentation. Clearly, we did not have the necessary permits to do the work, and the work was still done, so that's where we enter into the enforcement aspect of it. But now, obviously, I think what we're trying to express to our citizens, our taxpayers, and even the individuals that are representing some of the regulatory bodies here tonight is that we're putting a good faith effort into making sure we restore this back to the condition that should have been left there in 2015, that we're trying to be open and transparent as to the process going forward at this point. Again, we can't take back what had been previously done. At this point, we can only move forward and try to get it back to that condition and satisfy the regulatory bodies that are levying that enforcement on us.
Hold on, Wally. Go in turn here. Go ahead, Joel.
Does that 100-year flood take current state, or does it account for the proposed development on the east side of 76, where that big retention pond that feeds this?
Yeah, the procedure for that, so on the east side, we're assuming that that's fully developed and that those ponds are in place and functioning. So the ponds are there, but the development isn't all there yet. So we've assumed that it's going to be developed and those ponds have been designed for that development, okay? So that's kind of the east side. The west side, we're basically looking at that as being urbanized in the future, most likely, based on the town's comp plan. But we know that the town and the county have a stormwater ordinance that requires 100-year peak flow control, which means that there's probably going to be stormwater ponds built out here as well in the future. But we're being a little bit conservative on the west side because the ponds aren't there. We don't know where they're going to be. So we did assume that that was going to be, I think, residential over there in the future. So we are taking that into consideration as far as the floodplain study goes.
stricter.
And floodplain studies are intended to be more conservative than like a normal flood event, if you will.
You know, it seems to me that this was a screw from the start. Do we think here in Greenville that a project management code would probably be the benefit to us? So like, things like this wouldn't happen in the future, or things would be laid out by the plan, and everything would be done the way it should be?
Those are a lot of other things that we've been going through and investigating, those policies and procedures that were overlooked or missed, and how can we prevent this from happening in the future. So we've already started addressing those. We now have a purchasing policy in place, so any type of procurements, things like that, or projects of this nature would have to go through certain channels, depending on the level of cost, and have to get approvals all the way up to the town board level. So that was just approved in August, and we're going through other.
That does not lay out a systematic way to do the project. Project manager, you know, get somebody out there with some knowledge and lays out the whole damn thing, and which way it's gonna go, and how we're gonna get there, and who we're gonna hire, and
Well, that goes to our comprehensive plan somewhat, but just from my experience in project management, there's no one project that's going to be the same as any others. There's always something that's going to be unique about it and different. So everyone needs to be approached with its own opportunities and problems that you're solving for. Identifying who the stakeholders are, what the risks are of that, what the costs are, justification for doing it, and your whole reasoning, and then going forward with the recommended approach based on all the other alternatives. So project management approach, I know that the town does take that, just in reviewing the 2+ years that I've been here as chairman. For all of you, there's definitely a methodology that's used, although they might not have a project manager on staff, we might not. There's somebody that has that title, but there's leadership people that utilize project management methodology and everything that they've been doing.
Just to
That
answer
helps.
that too, obviously, this should have been a permitted project from the outset. It was not. Had it been permitted properly through the DNR and through the county, obviously there would be project plans, there would be schematics, there would be modeling. All the components that should have gone into that project would have been available and would have guided that project, exactly. Right. Typically, I would say that 99.9% of the projects in the town follow that guide.
That's what I mean by the stakeholdering and risk mitigation that Joel's talking about. So, in the back.
I was just addressing that gentleman when he was talking about the water going down into the Rat River and that stuff, splitting his property out. Probably way he can find out that if you go to the county, you get a topographical map at 1 foot elevation, and that'll show you where your watersheds go.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if watershed's going southwest, you can't make that water go northeast. I mean, you talk to the city of Athens, it costs them hundreds of thousands of dollars between them and Little Chute. It caused all that damage there. So you can't make somebody's water in the watershed go in somebody else's. So that's probably the reason why you have to go that way with the water.
Thank you for your comment. Joe and Jim. Go ahead, Joe.
If this would have been presented to the DNR, whoever has to approve the permits before it actually got done, in your opinion, would it have been approved?
The way it was done, probably not. And the reason for that is, the wetland drying up and, the cutting the stream down so much. I think there's certainly aspects of it that could have, what we were trying to do to the west here, I think could have been permitted with a little more time. But yeah, it's pricey going through even the permitting process and the engineering and, the plans and all that. Like I said, sometimes these projects take 3 to 12 months to get permitted. So there's a lot of people looking at them, a lot of scrutinizing going on. So.
Nick, if I could comment on that too, this is not an atypical project from that. Maybe the scope and the work that was done was not obviously in compliance with what the DNR would require. But municipalities like the town of Greenville or other communities, they do stream restoration projects that are permitted throughout the year. My prior community, we would do at least one stream restoration project a year for the purposes of flood control, erosion, stream bank stabilization, so on and so forth. So it's not that it's atypical to do this type of work, but through the permitting process, you get an approvable project.
Yeah, and a lot of the things we're doing right now are part of that process of getting it permitted for what Joel is talking about.
Jim? Hold on, John.
Nick, on the far west side, where you show the 2,000
Nope. The proposal was to put it back exactly the way it was. So what you see here is what would be put in, other than the DNR has asked for some pool riffle structure out here. If you know what that is in a stream bed where there's little pockets of water that are more frequently full of water, if you will. So no, I don't think it's going to cause a lot of erosion. I think one difference here is that this proposal has that vegetated buffer of 100 feet on each side, so that it's just going to be perennial grass, if you will. So it's not going to be like the bare soil that you see in this photograph.
Go ahead, John.
Could you help me understand, Beaker was the one that left the poor job and our town employee turned it into the DNR for this stream cleaning, and then after that, the DNR, as I understand, or otherwise please correct me, hired another company to clean this stream up. And then I hear that was that not done, or did nobody follow up to see what they did? Why did we have to go in and clean the stream now again? And how does the public understand the need for cleaning out a stream, but what we did in effect is we moved it? So I don't get it.
Yeah, I'm not aware of the DNR hiring someone to clean it out or that type of thing. But the stream projects are, if you can get the permits, whether DNR, Corps of Engineers, the county, local community, where you lay out, all the information, the benefits of it. For instance, we have a county drainage board here in Outagamie County, and the Everglade Marsh discharges into one of those legal drains, I believe. And every so often they'll come in and they'll do that dredging, that kind of thing, or maintenance, or widen, things like that. But they have to go through that permit process, to get those permits and put in place for the benefits. And sometimes those legal drains are done to help make the farm fields more farmable. Sometimes it's there for maintenance, so it varies. And things that were done in the 30s versus the 60s, as we go through time, what we're allowed to do is different.
Help me understand, where was the actual cleaning done on a map so that I can correspond? That was where the new ditch was put in?
I think right here from Highway 76 Municipal Drive, those culverts, right?
Was supposed to be near the interceptor is what I saw.
Yep, so from here all the way down to here is what was dredged out, if you will. Is that what you're asking?
Well, we have a new routing of the ditch.
Yep, that would be the pink line.
Okay, but not all of it is a totally new routing.
Oh, this.
Downstream, the bottom end is rerouted and beyond the trees where
Yep.
it went. And so that isn't the ditch cleaning, so I always have trouble understanding these companies that were supposed to be doing the work and then that we have a different new stream.
Yeah, so from here to about here, where that first disappearing stream or somewhere up in here, it was basically just lowered in elevation, but in the same location. It was just dropped down. And then from here and around, location was shifted as well as elevation. So those decisions, I can't speak to the why or that type of thing, but that was what was essentially done as part of that project.
Steve, hold on just 1 second. Did you have a question still?
Back to your other picture back there.
I don't think we have your, do we have your name and address yet?
Oh.
Your first time.
W-61, 43 Pilgrim Street,
What did you say your name was? Sorry.
Leonard Rice.
Leonard Rice, okay.
Obviously, that's just a picture of a ditch that wasn't maintained. So is the Lynn family giving all this land up for this project?
So what the plan is basically to put it back to the way it was.
And then you said they're giving 100 feet each way. So obviously, he's been farming this thing.
Mm-hmm.
Is the Lynn family responsible to give up this rented land, or?
So one of the